All right, post-election, what do we know about the turnout of SageCons? That's the spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives. That's the core of what I would call the evangelical world, about a little over 20 million voters. Joining me now to talk about this, George Barna. He's a senior research fellow for Christian ethics and biblical worldview here at the Family Research Council. Also, is the director of research at the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University and president of Metaformation Inc. George, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, good to be with you.
Okay, let's talk SageCons. You coined that term. That's spiritually active, governance engaged conservatives. Roughly 9% of the adult population.
Yeah, that's about what they are. What we've seen is probably over the course of time that's been declining because you're seeing so much of that in our culture. But when you look at their behavior, they again distinguish themselves not just by their beliefs, but the fact that they convert their beliefs into action. So in this election, while they represented 9% of the adult population, the voting age population, they also represented 14% of the vote.
So they were roughly 21 million votes.
Actually, there are about 23 million votes, and when you look at how they voted, there was a net difference between the votes for the two major candidates of 21 million.
So 21 million of them voted based on your research, voted for Donald Trump.
It was 22 point something million. When you take out the votes from Mr. Biden, then you get a little bit over 21 million as a margin for Mr. Trump.
Well, that would be almost a third of, if my math is correct, that would be almost a third of President Trump's vote.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty astonishing when you look at where did he get his vote, where did he get his support from. This is, without any doubt, without any qualifications, the most enthusiastic and united group of votes that he received from any of the 80 different segments of the population that we studied.
Okay, so we're talking about 23 million SageCons cast votes, about roughly 9% of the adult population. What percentage of that population turned out to vote?
Well, I mean, it's kind of shocking to say it, but 99% of them turned out to vote. And to put that in context, you have to understand that nationally they're estimating that 66% of all voting age adults turned out. That was considered high. That's certainly above average. But 99% is off the charts.
Is there any other voting bloc that turns out at that high of percentage?
No, and we looked at all the others. I mean, when you look at, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, women, liberals, blacks, conservatives, none of them came close to that 99%. So, yeah, I mean, that I would consider it to be a record, but I don't have all the historical evidence. But, man, you can't get much higher than 99%.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you top that. The only way we increase that number is by expanding the number of SageCons in America, and you and I have talked about that, and that is actually our mission, is to expand the number of SageCons. But let's talk first about this 99% turnout among SageCons, these 23 million American voters. What drove them in such high numbers to vote?
Well, we asked them that question, and we found out that the highest ranking motivation was the track record of President Trump. You have to remember back to 2016, people who voted for him, SageCons voted for him in huge numbers back in 2016, but they were essentially voting against Hillary Clinton. In 2020, they were voting for President Trump because of what he's done over the last 4 years. So that was the biggest driving motivation. But very close to that, we found that SageCons also enumerated his position on various social issues that matter to them, as well as his positions on several fiscal and economic issues. And overall, the fact that he has a conservative political ideology and he has leadership abilities that they've come to appreciate. Many of them saying, I never thought that I would say I appreciate Donald Trump's leadership. But after 4 years of it, that's where a large proportion of them have landed.
So 99% turned out to vote. What percentage of that 99% voted for Donald Trump?
97%, which again is staggering. It's mind-blowing. Back in 2016, because of the dislike for Mrs. Clinton, we had SageCons turning out at 91%. We thought, well, we're never going to see that again in our lifetime. This time, 99%. Back in 2016, 93% voted for President Trump. We thought, well, you really can't get much higher than that. Somehow, SageCons did it this time with 97%. So I think we're pretty much seeing the ceiling of what any particular voting segment could ever achieve.
Now, we're hearing the narrative in the media that evangelicals turned away from Donald Trump, the numbers declined. Now, that's not. Now, I don't want to mix terms here because SageCons are a subset of evangelicals. It's a tighter definition. But this speaks something that is contrary to the narrative of the media.
Yeah, but Tony, you have to remember what the media is basing their argument on. So they go back to the surveys that their pollsters have done, and because they don't understand religion, they don't really care about religion. They just ask people, hey, do you consider yourself to be an evangelical or a born-again Christian? First of all, they lump those two groups together. Secondly, they're relying on people to categorize themselves in that manner. And I'll tell you, we did the same thing in our surveys, but only for comparative purposes. We don't measure people based on their self-identification. We look at what they believe and what they do spiritually, and then we categorize them into various segments, spiritual segments, one being evangelical, a different one being born-again Christians, another one being SageCons. So we've got these various segmentations that are based not on what people prefer to call themselves, but based on what they believe and what they do. And our research shows a very different outcome among evangelicals even than what you would hear from the mainstream media.
Now, you and I in the past have worked on, in previous elections, focused a lot of energy and effort on voter registration and trying to get evangelicals to register to vote. I don't know how deep you've gone with the SageCons, but it looks like there are very few SageCons that are not participating in the process. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's accurate, and it's because of the fact that their worldview compels them to be involved. They believe that the Bible teaches if you're going to represent Christ, you don't pick and choose where you represent him. You represent him everywhere. So that means in your community, in the voting booth, in your schools, in your churches, in your place of work, no matter where you go, you represent Christ. And so it's not surprising to find that SageCons believe they have a biblical responsibility to vote. And the kind of vote that they cast needs to be one where they believe at some point in the future, they're going to stand before God and have to give account for that. So they're really careful. They do a lot of homework. They're one of the most politically attentive groups or segments in our population. So, yeah, it's not surprising that they're participating at these really high rates.
So George, to more precisely define those individuals, they are politically engaged because they are spiritually active.
Yeah, it's their faith that comes first in their life. To them, it's all about knowing, loving, and serving God.
Right.
And so when they look at things, they believe that the Bible is his word. And so they want to take their cues for everything, not just voting, but including voting, not from what the media tells us, not from what their professors in college taught them, but from what God has said in his word. So it's a very different way of looking at what's my responsibility and how can I carry it out most meaningfully.
Yeah, and that is, people told me, how'd you get in politics? I got into this political arena because of my faith. because I saw things that were not right, and I felt compelled because of my relationship with Jesus Christ and my commitment to biblical truth to get engaged. I was happy not being involved. I voted and all that kind of stuff, but I never envisioned being in this arena. But it was through my faith, and I think that's what a SageCon is. We're not political animals. We are spiritual beings that are drawn through responsibility to Scripture to engage in the culture around us, and politics is a part of that.
And Tony, I know that when you look back at your time in the legislature, when you look at all that you're doing on Capitol Hill these days with FRC, it's not a comfortable position to be in. You are attacked because of your faith. You are attacked when you do good things for people because it was driven by your faith. But when your faith is number one, that's irrelevant.
Yes.
This is what God put you here to do. This is your calling. This is your purpose. This is why you get out of bed in the morning. And that's just part of what comes with it, because we're just passing through on this planet. We know that we've got a job to do. We do it, and then we look forward to spending eternity in God's presence.
Yeah, that's interesting, George, because when I have people come to me and, knowing that I've been in politics for a quarter of a century, held office, they say, I feel I want to run for office, and what do I need to do? And my first response to them, or my first question is, has God called you to this? For that very reason, because if God's called you, and this is an outgrowth of your faith, then it doesn't matter what people say or do to you. But if it's not, if you're stepping into this into your own strength and for your own purposes, you will conform to the pressures around you, and you will fail in your mission to represent Christ and the truth in this arena, because it is an unforgiving, oppressive, difficult, vicious arena.
Yeah, and so when somebody says they want to go into it, praise God, but make sure He called you to
right.
it. It's not just something that you find interesting or attractive or appealing, or it's a stepping stone. You're going to fail if that's the case. And then if you do decide that, yeah, God called me into it, toughen up, because you're walking to the front lines of the battle.
Yeah.
You're going to be attacked daily for stuff that you shouldn't be attacked for.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of the game.
All right, George, we're almost out of time, and I got to get to this question, because in the midst of this survey, you also asked people whether or not they felt that the process, the voting, was carried out legally, their votes were going to be counted. And I did the same thing with our listeners today, and I want to compare those numbers. What did you find?
Well, we asked this both of the general public as well as SageCons, and two diametrically opposed answers. We found with SageCon, 79% said that they believe there were numerous instances of abuse and that those instances changed some of the election outcomes. In contrast, what we found was that 2 out of 3 people in the general public felt that, generally speaking, the election was proper and appropriate, and there were no outcomes that were changed by anything that might have happened.
Interesting. Well, among our listeners today, same question. Of course, a lot of more information has come forward since you did this poll a couple weeks ago, but we had 96% of our listeners said there were numerous incidences of abuse that they believe changed the outcomes. 1%, less than 1%, not sure. 4% said there were numerous instances but did not change the outcome. Less than 1% said that they may have been some instances of abuse, but they did not change any outcome. So our audience, very, very suspect of this election and the manipulation that they've heard about.
And what that says to me is we're probably dealing with an audience of SageCons, people who understand these things that we're talking about. And man, I'd encourage them to not give up the fight. I mean, this is something that's got to go on every day for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. And that is my mission, to make more SageCons. And you're going to help me do that. George Barna, thanks so much for being with us today.
Always great to be with you, Tony. Thank you.
All right, George Barna. He understands this stuff, and I love having him on the program. You can find out more. Go to the website, TonyPerkins.com, and check it out. And help us make more SageCons. Talk about what you hear. Don't shrink back into the shadows or be silent. Speak boldly the truth, because it is the truth that sets us free. Until next time, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, prepared, and taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.